So, good morning everybody, and welcome to our final plenary session. I think some more people may drift in when they finish getting coffee, but we're going to start, so we'll hopefully be on time and have lots of time for questions. Congratulations for making it to the final day. So, for those of you who haven't met me already, my name's Lauren Redhead. I'm a senior lecturer in music at Canterbury Christ Church University, and I'm also the co-director of the Centre for Practice-Based Research in the Arts, which is an interdisciplinary research centre at this university, and that represents practice research in disciplines including music, sound art, visual art and media, film, dance, drama, creative writing, and practices that deal with their intersection. So I'm really happy to be chairing this session, in particular because of the increasing importance of practice in music research today, and what lots of people are calling the formative turn in musicology affects everybody, even people who aren't practitioners. So the focus on practice is really important right now. So this session is going to start with a very brief contextual introduction that I will give, and then there will be 3 short papers by our guests, Dr. Tom Armstrong and Dr. Leah Kardos, and a little bit from me. So I'm delighted to introduce both of our guests, and I'm going to embarrass them by reading out their list of achievements now. So Dr. Tom Armstrong, who's sitting at the end, is from the University of Surrey. He studied composition with Roger Marsh at York, and also with Vinga Globokar. He works for the concert hall, the theatre for amateurs and for children, and he's been commissioned by many people, including Making Music, Round, the National Youth Ballet, Martin Feinstein, Crosswords Engines Trust, Notes in a Gal, and the Delta Saxophone Quartet. His recent work has been much more collaborative and thinking about ways to engage with performer creativity, and he's currently working on many projects, including an open scored work for 1 or more keyboards, which he's only recently found out about this morning from this biography.
Yeah, that's what I forgot about. Sounds interesting though, I'll return to it at some point.
And you can hear his work on Meridian Records and Sigmund Classics. He's also the Director of Postgraduate Research for the School of Arts at Surrey. And we've also got Dr. Leah Kardos, who joins us from Kingston University, and she's a composer and a producer who makes music that might have live instrumental performance, technology, location recordings, and found sounds. She's interested in the communicative power of timbre, in psychoacoustic phenomena, memory, and pattern recognition, and the ways that music connects to life. She's also interested in technology and creativity in different contexts. And you can hear her music on the London-based label Big O and Toghetti. And she also enjoys listening to, thinking and writing about music, in particular pop music analysis, sonic musicology, digital creativities, analogue recording techniques, and the results of practice research. And she also has a special interest in the critical and musicological study of the music of David Bowie. So you can ask her about that as well. I'm a composer and I'm also a performer, and I specialise in experimental music, and I also like to write about recent music and practice. So just to briefly introduce some of the things that we might talk about in this session. I'm using the term practice research to describe research where practice is both the means of investigation and the means of dissemination or output. And that differentiates these methodologies from those that include practice without making it the central research methodology. So not that there's a hierarchy there, but that those things are just different. The term practice research was coined at Goldsmiths at a conference organised by Simon McVeigh, who's now the head of the RMA, because it seeks to avoid the micro-politics of practice as, practice-led, practice-based research that have happened in some discussions, and to kind of bring all those researchers together. And the RMA have championed practice research in the last couple of years. They've started asking questions about why don't practitioners perhaps participate in the RMA activities as much as they might or as much as they're wanted to. And as a result of that, they've set up a writing group, they've set up a discussion group, and they've made it a priority to think about how practice can be incorporated in all of their events as much as possible. So this is something that the RMA have really put a lot of thought and effort into in the last couple of years. So at that conference in Goldsmiths, I talked a bit about what the future of practice research might be. And I'm just going to kind of rehearse 2 parts from that talk, maybe to get as thinking about some of the benefits and the affordances of this kind of research. So one of my first points are that the terminologies of practice research are indicative of its openness. So the terms used to describe research, which is in some way associated with creative or artistic practice, have proliferated, and that's an indication of diversity in this area of research, as well as a search for precision by scholars who wish to describe the subtleties of what they do. So this isn't a common language characterised by style, approach, or description. It's a way of conceptualising research as an open space for creative practice. Second, the discourse that we take part in can be derived from the research. So practice research does take place within institutions, but its discourse can still be practitioner-led. The institution doesn't dictate or generate the research, we do, and if its discourses are derived from it, then its linguistic and discursive counterpart might support and promote its ideals rather than constrain it. And linked with that, of course, the academy is not the only institution that we interact with. So outside of universities, artistic practice isn't utopian, but it's also institutionalised. So, for example, the Arts Council, the PRSF, opera houses, and those institutions are actually considerably less transparent than universities often. So, if we're saying that the university asks questions of practitioners, it's not true that other institutions don't do that. The third point I made is that practice research is, by its nature, dissenting. So its methodologies and its methodological critique has the potential to ask and maybe answer far-reaching questions about the nature of research, practice, and the value of these things within and outside the institutions that may or may not support them. And this is already evident in the many debates around this methodology and the fact that institutions have already had to change to accommodate practice. As a fourth point, I would say that practice research promotes diversity. If practitioners are more diverse than their artistic counterparts in the programmes of concert halls, opera houses and galleries, so we see more diverse practitioners in universities than we do in mainstream contemporary art. And their methodologies, approaches and work are also more diverse than the commercial artwork. So practice research is addressing questions about whose voices we get to hear and how and on whose terms we get to hear them, and much more successfully than the art world. And so finally, practice research models community. And in music, we have had many recent criticisms of, for example, the model of the orchestra as a microcosm of an ideal society. And equally, individual and isolated researchers don't model society that well. So the tradition of collaboration and public presentation and dissemination as an integral part of practice research better models community than other available models. So what practice research will not do is provide the world with any long-term medical, economic or environmental solutions. And it would really be a mistake to try to make this body of work engage with those same questions and debates about value as other disciplines which can do that very well. I think the future will provide many opportunities for the practitioners of practice research to counter the tendencies to consider all research as homogeneous and narrowly defined. Instead, these methodologies have the potential to ask questions about the definition of research culture as a whole, and that might not sufficiently be answered by the current academic context. So, just to posit some of those questions, they might be, what is knowledge? Who, when, and where does it come from, and how might it be transmitted? How can research processes be recognised and emphasised over research outcomes and products? How can research, art, and their practices be dissociated from their authors and proponents? What are the criteria for the assessment of research outputs or works, and how can they be applied when outworks are ephemeral or do not exist? And finally, what does research even mean? So given that these questions can be equally addressed by colleagues across disciplines, the separation of composition, performance, or music from other art forms, or to speak about only research in one of those areas seems perhaps inadequate. And so I think the future of practice research, in my opinion, holds further dissolution of disciplinary boundaries and erosion of those labels and technology. So I think the two talks that we'll hear will speak to some of those points. And first, I'd invite Dr. Tom Armstrong to speak, He has directed an HRC network entitled Music Composition as Interdisciplinary Practice, so I'm sure he'll speak to us about some of those crossing boundaries and ideas. So please can we welcome Tom to speak.
Okay. So the first of the PhDs I'm going to talk about briefly is actually quite a traditional one. This is the still the kind of Surrey model of the composition PhD. You have a research project which is not necessarily linked to the student's own music, although it might draw on aspects of that. The student in this particular case, who I'm supervising though, has had to undergo this experience of making a transition from being just a practitioner, if you like, to a practitioner researcher. And the interesting thing is that that's actually very much mirrored my own transition. We're actually a similar age, me and this student, and we've kind of gone through this kind of process together. Now, if you know Robin Nelson's book on practice as research, you'll know that the kinds of things that he specifies in this transition of the idea of getting used to presenting a research inquiry at the outset of a practical project, which in fact was not the student's experience. The student's experience was that they arrived doing a kind of fairly traditional composition PhD, and then gradually, as my interests and the kind of academic world they were in gradually changed, they're part-time, so they've been doing it for a while, it turned to something rather different. There's obviously the idea of critical reflection, insightful documentation, understanding the lineage of your practice. But the thing that this student has found most challenging is relating their practice to broader contemporary debate. But they have gradually succeeded in doing that, and they've derived a kind of theoretical model that starts from Thomas Kuhn and his ideas around intuition and so on. And what this has done is it's kind of given them a very reflective and reflexive process, and that's been very pleasurable to see as the research has gone on, that they've been able to articulate what they're doing within the given paradigm, and it's also fed back into how their own practice has changed. So you've got that kind of feedback loop happening, which has been really, really good to see and really useful creatively. I've experienced the same thing, really. I mean, my own work, as I've had to engage more with the research dimension of what I do and put it in those kind of contexts, it of course has changed the music I write quite considerably, and it's broadened my ability to do different things as a composer, which is no bad thing. The second PhD I'm supervising is rather different. So the student here is actually a music director in the Roman Catholic Church, and what they are concerned with is the recent new translation of the Mass text into English, which is an official translation. It's officially sanctioned and it's compulsory, so all Catholic liturgies have to adopt this. And they are quite critical of most of the settings of this translation. So what their PhD is doing is using composition as a kind of test vehicle to see whether they can address these criticisms through the music that they're writing. And it's developed also into a kind of ethnographic study of their particular community and their church and other Catholic musicians in the diocese and other dioceses and so on. So here, the focus when the PhD is finally examined is not really on the artistic quality of the practice itself, but it's how well it addresses the criticism of the music that exists and also the quality of ethnographic insight that is delivered from working on these new pieces. This also, I think, raises the issue of expertise with practice research PhDs. This person arrived as a very kind of hands-on, practical, very skilled director of music, and they've had to acquire gradually the ethnographic skills necessary to actually undertake this kind of project. So I think there are some kind of issues around that one has to consider when developing these kind of projects and working with students. The final one is actually more about improvisation rather than composition. Now, I'm not a philosophy expert by any means, so I'm actually the second supervisor in this PhD. It's in its early stages, and what's been interesting at this point is considering the role of writing within the PhD. This is a practitioner who's already well versed in the practice research world. Indeed, has published work out there already. And the idea about this is to really ask questions such as how much writing is actually needed, being really aware of why it's there and what its function is. And one of the things we've been talking about, me and the other supervisor, we tend to do the supervisions jointly, is exactly that. How much writing is actually required? Do you require a really large exegesis, or should you, and I think you should, have confidence in the practice itself to deliver knowledge and deliver ideas? And actually, in a sense, make the examiners do the work. They need to make some of the connections themselves between the practice and the ideas around it. We've also thought a little bit about language. So, for example, if language has a tendency to fix things, which, with regard to improvisation, sets off a bit of a tension, then that's not necessarily a negative thing, but it means what kind of thinking can you do with language that you can't do with improvisation, music, and so on. And finally, it's also raised the idea of different modes of presentation. This student has given a lot of conference presentations and actually feels that oral mode of presentation is much closer to improvisation than the written exegesis. So we're thinking of, in these early stages, of possible ways that might be able to be incorporated as part of the submission, as well as, of course, live performance. Just thinking about different modes of presentation, very conveniently, an email from Chris Williams popped into my inbox a few days ago. Chris's PhDs has just been published, is actually published as a website. And it seems to me that for practitioners, this is something that's really well worth considering. This is coming from someone who doesn't even have their own website yet. But I mean, I think it's something that is thinking about different ways of getting your research out there, different modes and so on, is potentially really useful. But a couple of things from Chris when I emailed him to say how interesting this kind of project looks. He said, I was lucky to find a good designer to make it happen. So there is the practical consideration that to get a really effective website that's going to also do the job of a kind of thesis, you do need to put in the website building legwork or find someone to collaborate with. So it's not something to be undertaken lightly. But he also says he's probably going to write a making of the website this year. So that would be something to watch out for. Because I think with things, I mean, lots of ideas coming up around and regulations coming up around open access, I think web-based PhDs are going to become much more common. And as technology gets easier to use, they're going to become more feasible as well. Just very quick mention of some of my own practice, or could be your practice in research. This is really moving beyond the kind of PhD element now. I'm currently working on a project, broadly speaking, on distributed creativity, with a musicologist colleague of mine and a digital researcher stroke archivist at Surrey. We're developing a research bid, as one does. And basically what I'm thinking is, what can I bring to the table as a composer? So it's trying to really have faith in my music as being a useful part of this research process. It's not just a way of dressing it up or illustrating some aspect of it. But to do that, of course, I think one of the things that's come out for me as I've sort of engaged with practice research more is the idea of being flexible in your practice. You have to, and I guess it slightly speaks to one of your points, Lauren, about how this research can be kind of quite subversive in some ways. You have to question how you do it and what it actually is, I think. So for me, what might I define as being composition? So for example, for this project, which is very nascent, which is why I'm not telling you much about it, because I don't want it to suddenly appear in someone else's PhD, it's to do with the idea of possibly recreating archival materials that may not exist at the moment or may have existed but have been lost. So part of my role could be to do some recomposition or reconstitution of that, reimagining. The idea of composition as broadening out to encompass programming and curation, if you like, as well as just putting notes, sounds together, whatever they might be, whatever your practice is. So it's just kind of really because basically I've had this kind of thing of feeling basically practice research means a lot of writing. Now, I have no objection to writing, but A, I don't find it very easy. It's not the way I was trained. I did a very traditional PhD at York many, many years ago, so the Echo will remember. We overlapped a little bit. But I've kind of always had a sense that, one has to write a big, meaty article. But in fact, I'm now starting to think, well, not necessarily. I'm not saying that, one just presents one's work and, the research is in there, you just have to find it. But it's just really being careful with how the writing is used, not feeling that there has to be practice and then large kind of exposition as well. I had a little anecdote actually from Robin Nelson, who was looking at a piece of mine where he did some consultancy for us at Surrey, looking at our practitioners' work, and actually having him sit down and say, well, Tom, actually, yeah, you've written this book chapter, I think it's pretty good, it says some things about your work, I can see how it links to the music, but actually it seems to me that what you're looking at is this open work idea. So if you take that and you had 4 different performances, compared certain sections of the piece, just made a little recording of each one, commented on how the different context of the ideas changed the meaning of it, whatever it might be, you'd have a really effective, compact little project. And it was just the idea that it's made me think that, I need to have more confidence in the research potential of my work without feeling I have to write any more of exegesis around it. It's kind of nuancing and supporting certain research aspects of it. The research network Lauren mentioned, the reason I've put this at the end is that one of the things that you get in Robin Nelson's book, if you've read it, and it's a little statement tucked away where he says that he feels that for him, practice research, or as he calls it, practice as research, is basically inherently interdisciplinary in nature. And I just think it's useful to be aware that there are different types of interdisciplinary work. So here we can see, this is taken again actually probably from the article that you referenced, Lauren, by Georgina Bourne from 2010, and she has these 3 modes of interdisciplinarity. So the first one being a kind of a relatively balanced relationship between the 2 disciplines, then more hierarchical relationships, and finally a relationship which is more hinging around challenge and critique of one discipline, of each discipline. And although for Bourne, you get the impression that this is the one she feels is capable of the biggest contributions to knowledge, I think it's worth noting that all of these exist, and that the criteria for obtaining a PhD is not that it's paradigm busting, necessarily. I mean, Robin Nelson is quite good on that, I think, and quite reassuring that you can give, he uses a phrase that has been used already, giving insights rather than answers, which I think relates to what you were saying, Lauren, about a kind of different kind of research from the sciences and so on. And I think that's important to bear in mind. So interdisciplinarity, as we found out in the network, it doesn't necessarily mean expertise in more than one discipline. Sometimes it's enough to have an understanding of how disciplines can be brought together and what that might produce. So that's pretty much me for now. Maybe we can come back to the network later, after we've heard from Leah, if people have questions. So I've got another little presentation I can whip through with more pictures in, if that's helpful. But thank you very much.
Thank you. I love a good presentation.
Hi. I want to talk to you today about just one of the issues, one of the questions that I perhaps struggled with when I was doing my PhD, which was a creative practice PhD in music. And the thing about these sorts of PhDs is that they're sort of really highly personal, and the research question kind of gets defined a lot by your context and where you're coming from and what you're looking at and what your research inquiry is. And so because of that, not all of these models are the same. And so I just want to share with you the way I kind of made it through. This slightly misleading maybe, what is creative practice research and what is work? I mean, there might be some people who say work is creative practice research, and yeah, it might be if that was my research question. I actually came into this not having a research question really. I just wanted a PhD. So I was like, I just want to make music, and then can you give me a PhD for that? And I had to work really hard with my supervisor to try and find a pathway in that. Sometimes you see PhDs and their titles are excellent, like, examining multimodal, approaches to using Ableton Live with this violin with special tuning, and it becomes very specific. My PhD is called folio of compositions plus critical commentary. So really, not much is going on. And the reason why I'm separating the research from work is because I'm a working musician and I make money with my music. You know, girls got to earn $1. So some of the work that I was making wasn't really part of my research. And so part of the struggle for me with my research project was, you know, I was working a lot, I was generating lots of music, but what was research and what wasn't? And that's what I kind of want to just go through the journey with you now. It might be useful to you, maybe. So, the first project that I began with was called Featherhammer. And animated. We'll just play a little bit of that music while I talk about it. So with this project, I was trained as a pianist, and when I first started, I felt really intimidated by classical music and the tradition of it and the culture of it. And where I was in PhD groups with other students who were like, I don't know, they didn't like pop music like I did. They might talk about, Mussorgsky or Scriabin, and I'd be there like, Beatles. I'd be like, I like Phil Glass, I'm sorry. Things like that, but obviously I'm classically trained as well. But I felt ashamed about my musical upbringing and the ingrained figures. I might go into a piano shop and play the piano, and someone might play Debussy, and I'll be there just playing the beginning of Let It Be. And that would be my muscle memory. And I also grew up, my parents were really religious, and I'd play in the church, and so I learned how to vamp on triads and stuff like that. And all of these ingrained figures would become part of my musical language. And so with this first project, I wanted to connect with piano as my instrument, but also to look at muscle memory and to look at how things happen. This is a piece of music where I was trying to recall a moment of doing Hanon exercises at the piano, so lots of repeated things. But also that one time when I was playing as a kid and I realised that you could stack up thirds and create sevenths and ninths, and oh my god. And that moment of magic where you thought, I can create something beautiful. And so this is what this piece is. And the whole project is about that. It's about exploring this personal narrative and trying to find some kind of breakthrough. Because of that, it's practice research. And it went into the folio and it became part of my PhD. And I got to talk about it a lot. And it made for some good personal breakthroughs, but also some good theoretical connections. And that's the thing as well that I wanted to point out, is that, I might have said, yeah, I want to make music, give me a PhD, but I had to connect the theory to that. So it's like my music embodied the theory. And, I made the music first, and then I looked at it. So this kind of reflective practice, this reflexive practice. So you make this music, you're asking questions, you're examining all the moving parts, all the hinges, what's going on, what informed that decision, where does this come from, really analysing it. And then testing the theory out, say, well, what model, what kind of methodology will help me unpack this even further? And so because of this, you have compositional technique evolving, but you also have the testing out of the theory and the possible adaptation of the theory to fit. And so this is how practice can kind of grow. I'm going to go through this a little bit quicker. Machines was my next project, which was with a singer, and it was all about spam emails, and I used to get these sort of emails a lot. Back in the day, you don't see these ones much anymore, but it's a bunch of random text, and so I decided to make a song cycle out of, using like a William Burroughs cut-up technique. I kind of brought in intuition into the picture, cut up the words to make music that kind of makes more sense. So this song is called Hollow Friends, and even though there was sort of a randomization aspect and a chaotic aspect to it, the song feels very emotional, it feels very narrative, and particularly in the sort of the architecture of the song cycle, it kind of makes some kind of dramatic sense. And so because I was investigating this process, I think I'm talking over the song, which I don't want to do because her voice is so lovely. This is Laura Lavonovich. It was a person I met on Twitter, by the way, great networking tool, who I met on Twitter also. So again, this is practice research because I was really sort of looking at this process of where ideas can come from and what I can do with these materials. Barbara Bolt talks about this idea of the materiality of practice research, this idea that you're examining, the touch of the pencil onto the paper, you're examining that process of the creation, the weaving. And that's what that was. It was looking at how it all came together and then what it meant at the end. This is 3 Preludes, a project that I did with a pianist, where what we ended up doing was sort of this idea of filtering ideas through people. What I ended up doing was like getting people to sight read slightly difficult music, and then the mistakes that they made I'd incorporate into a new version of the piece, or if they played something wrong, or I'd make something deliberately unplayable and just see what they did, and then that would inform what happened. And this idea of filtering stuff through and back in between. We can hear the sight reading, the very first record. I don't know if you can hear.
Key, C sharp.
It's a really nicely out of tune there as well. Alright, I'm not going to play the whole thing. I'm going to get back there and play the second piece of music. I don't think I can actually do it. I have to do this. And then in the end it became an album, and not only did I use the recordings from the crappy sight reading, but I also sat outside like a stalker outside his window and actually recorded the sound of the traffic and like him practicing a section over and over again. And so again, just this idea of filtering the music, like the music goes out into the system and it comes back changed, and so what can I do with that changed state? Again, looking at process, but just to clear it up, this is how it ended up sounding in the end. And some of the mistakes that he made in the sight read made it into the final version. I wish I could play you all my music just for like an hour or something. Sorry. Okay. Also in my PhD, I ended up doing this project. I'm a big Bowie fan, and then I've sort of now become a sort of Bowie scholar, which is weird because it's like a little annex from everything else I do with my academic life. But I did this project where it was engaging with pop music styles, and I went through his back catalogue and just took all the snippets and samples and one-shots and all the bits of music loops what I could find to recreate cover versions. And it became this project that I included just like sort of a scavenger hunt, really, sort of trying to find treasure and then making music out of that. There's about 65 different Bowie songs in this texture. And I'm singing, so I'll get rid of that. Okay, so at the same time, I was also in this band. And we, sounds like this, and we would like play gigs, and I would also help, create music in the band, and I'd collaborate. This is a track that I'm actually singing on with the lead singer James. But I would say that this is not practice research. It didn't go into the portfolio. Even though it was part of it and it was creative, it just didn't go in, and the reason why is because there was no question mark attached to it. It was just music practice. It wasn't music practice research. I wasn't sort of investigating anything. I wasn't trying to find the result. I wasn't setting up some conditions to see what would happen. I was literally just making music with these other people. Now, had my PhD been about collaborative practices in bands, and had my investigation been all about working with other people in this context, then it would have gone into my PhD. That's the kind of thing I want to try and talk about today. But it didn't, because that's not what I was looking at. But this did, and this is just a Tumblr page, right? But this is like visual ideas that, to me, speak musically. And it's this idea of sort of multimedia inspiration, anything that kind of suggests juxtaposition, color, textures, movement. I would sort of tag them up and just post them up there. And whenever I felt like I was, my inspiration was running dry, I would look at my Tumblr and go, well, that's a really cool idea. That's powdery. Oh, it's a cloud. Oh, these structured colors inside of antlers. Oh, I want to make music like that. And so I would be inspired by the stimuli. And that, to me, has a research angle, so I put it in as an appendix in the PhD, because it speaks to process. And process is what I was investigating. Here's some bit of orchestral music. I don't think it is going to play. Perhaps, no? There's a bit of music here. Got commissioned for an orchestral piece throughout all of this. And that, even though I worked super hard on it, it didn't go in, okay? Because it was really just this, I was given a brief. And so that music, to me wasn't part of what now, at this stage of my research, was becoming quite a clear question about process, and it was becoming a clear question about personal narratives and how I see the materials of music, how they pass from hand to hand, how they pass through process. And so this didn't make it through, but as I keep going, any kind of work I did with bands, like remixing their music, isn't practiced research in my view, because even though I'm using the techniques that I've sharpened up and the ideas that I've developed throughout the whole process, it's kind of like they're in my tool belt now. I've kind of made them, I've adapted them, but now it's just work. And I continue on. These crappy movie scores that I did, God, don't look at them, they're terrible. But they don't count. But this doesn't either. And this is a good movie that I did that's been really good. Even a good movie that I work on, because I'm working to picture, because I've been given a brief, because I've been given a sample track to emulate. In this case, for this purpose, I don't really consider it to be, but this I do. And so in the sessions for Notes on Blindness, I collected all the outtakes and made a track called Little Face, released that. But I also set the stereo mics so they were a bar and a half apart and just listened to what happened, and it sounded quite cool, and then I layered some more on. So I created these nice phasing versions of this composition, and then I added some beats to it, and I made it kind of this 8-minute thing. And that to me is kind of, now this is post-PhD, but to me this is like ticking that box for me as continuing research, as in looking at sort of taking materials that are left over and making stuff out of it. And then now my label is releasing this record called The Exquisite Corpse, which took my piece as a starting point and bounced it around some different artists that are on Big O and Traghetti's label, but also Moderna Records. And so you see there's a few tracks that have been released, and you can't see at the bottom there, but mine's due soon. And I get to like re-metabolize my own starting point as it comes through. And again, that to me, because of my research angle that emerged through the journeying of my PhD, all about process, all about where do ideas come from, where do they go, how are they changed, how are they transformed, my modes of engagement with all of these processes, my modes of engagement with technology, all of this stuff now has sort of become my research angle. So what I wanted to sort of talk about here is just how, so this is like library music. As I said, girls gotta make $1. So this is a practice research. So I hope you get the picture. Essentially, as a working musician, as someone who's generating music for lots of different purposes, when I started out my PhD, I had no idea what it would look like at the end. But as I was working and as I was intellectually engaging with my process, my research question sort of revealed itself. And it became a fascination with process, and it became about all this stuff. And then as I went through and I was reflecting, and I was being reflexive with it, then the theory that got involved, I started adapting it to fit my purposes, started considering my cultural traditions, I started considering my history as a musician, I started considering postmodernism and what it means, if it means anything at all. And all this stuff comes in and it starts to populate this lovely picture. And the music that I've made, the portfolio that I pulled together, is really specially chosen to embody that connection between the intellectual engagement and the work itself. And the work itself speaks for itself in a way as a cohesive body of work without me even having to make it that way. I hope that makes sense. I'm being a bit vague. But these two quotes really speak to me. And they're from my two favourite academics in this field, Estelle Barrett. So there's a really good book that they've both done, Barrett and Bolt, which is Practice as Research. I really enjoyed that. But the first quote I like, and it's just from a paper, and it says, a crucial question to initiate this engagement is, what did the process reveal that could not have been revealed by any other mode of inquiry? And that was a really key sort of cornerstone philosophy for what I was doing with my research. And then the last one is research and experimental development comprise creative work undertaken on a systematic basis in order to increase the stock of knowledge, including the knowledge of man, culture, society, and the use of this stock of knowledge to devise new applications. And really that's what creative practice research is. It's about learning through doing and then packaging up that knowledge so other people can use it and make use of it. I could talk for ages, but I think we'll leave it there.
Thank you so much. But I'd just like to open to the floor because I'm sure there's lots of responses to those two talks.
Yeah, I want to address some of the points by the last speaker, which was absolutely fascinating. I like the actual approach of it's research when there is a question involved. It seems to be very worth doing. But if you take that line and just extend it and look at people outside of universities, do you then have to start calling David Bowie a researcher, or is Tom Waits a researcher, and why doesn't he have a PhD?
Well, Bowie did have one. They gave him one of those, celebrity ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean...
So does the Queen, I think, though.
Sure, honorary doctorate.
Yeah. It's
Which are given for contribution to knowledge and culture, And then I've got a PhD student who's doing his by publication, and he was a musician. But he was like big in the 60s, and so he's sort of going back and presenting his contribution to culture with a little thesis, and he's doing it retroactively. So in a way, we're kind of, hopefully going to award this individual a PhD for work that they did outside of the academy.
You think this is the way we should be moving? That's my question. Do you think this is the right direction?
I just think it's one useful direction. I just think it's worthwhile. I think, my PhD, I'm not going to sort of pretend like, as you said, it's like we're not trying to make music that changes the world. What we're trying to do is provide insights.
Although some people may well be. For some people, of course, changing the world, the musical world in some way, is what drives them creatively. And I think this is where it's very important not to say there is one way of doing a practice-based PhD, or is one particular thing, because there are some composers that very much thrive on being at the kind of forefront of their particular discipline. But others don't. I'm certainly not one of those. I'm much more interested in sitting back within a tradition. But of course, that in itself is something to write about.
Yes.
There are things to nuance within that tradition. There might be neglected parts of it that one could be resurrected, looked at in a new light, in some way. I think that kind of contribution to knowledge thing is kind of very important to bear in mind, but different ways that can occur.
So you agree with your colleague that there should be a question?
I think in the end, yeah, there probably does need to be. I mean, certainly, I wouldn't have got the money from the HRC without having to come up with some questions around interdisciplinarity that I wanted to answer. That was the hardest thing about doing that, making the grant.
I mean, if you're investigating something, you're looking at something, you're looking for something, you're looking at the detail, you're looking for answers. I mean, a research question could be really specific, or it could be really vague, like mine was. I just want to make music, let's look at the process. But there has to be an investigation. You need to be looking at all, the granular detail of what's going on, what informs decisions, but the macro detail, where does it sit in the landscape, the cultural landscape, where does it sit in the field? What's its lineage, ancestry.com, where does this idea come from, and as soon as you start investigating that, then it becomes a research question, because you want to know.
It's very interesting comparing, because our two PhDs seem strikingly similar in some ways. Mine was a portfolio with commentary, but this was at York in, when was it? 1990, well, the early 90s, so practice of research was really nascent, and certainly in the UK, no one, it wasn't a term that had come up. And I definitely didn't have any research questions. I mean, my PhD was all just about craft. It was essentially becoming a better composer. And that certainly in today's environment, that's much, I mean, you could do that, of course, as a PhD if you want to do that, but it's harder to, I think that's a more difficult thing to do, to sort of justify. I mean, I'm not saying that's necessarily a good thing, but I think yours went in a slightly different direction. You did kind of start to formulate, you connected much more theory into what you were doing. With my one, it was certainly, yes, what's the lineage I'm working in? Who am I influenced by? Who am I listening to that has got into this? But I wasn't trying to develop new ideas about what composition might be, or to challenge the existing modes of composing. I was trying to become a better composer.
I think there's two things that are conflated here, which is the mode of investigation, which is the practice, and then there is the research, which is the contribution to knowledge. And universities don't have any ownership over either of those things. And so, if you were to take your question in another discipline, do independent researchers in musicology exist? Yes, they do. Do researchers exist in commercial environments and science? Yes, they do, and their job title might not be research. So are practitioners doing research understood as an original contribution to knowledge? Yes, they are, but it might not be important to them to gain that institutional recognition, which is the PhD. So the PhD doesn't own research, and neither does the university. The PhD is one mode of recognition for research that is done by someone. And when you start to kind of pick those things apart, then I think you can see, well, actually, yeah, these people in the past did fantastic research in music when that really wasn't a possibility for them to do within the academy. And so, okay, in some situations, that academic kind of tick in the box does have a lot of weight with it. That doesn't make that practice any less valuable as a communication of knowledge.
Oh, I wasn't saying that the practice was less valuable. It was actually, I like the comparison with musicology, because I think musicology is really the odd one out here. Because actually, I don't think there are all that many people who are sort of freelance musicologists. There are loads of people who are sort of not in university doing science research. That's probably the vast majority. I think musicology is a bit strange, the fact that you don't get that many of them. And in the sense that you have lots of composers outside of universities. I think the problem with the comparison I have might be that musicology is a bit of a strange thing.
Well, you're also, sorry, just a trend that I've seen is that a lot of composer practitioners are engaging with musicology more. It kind of links to what you just said before, and partly because, you know, when you're defending your creative practice, you have to draw upon a globe's worth of musicological tradition to try and find, you know, the lineage of what's going on. I mean, and you know, as we have access to music so much easier now, and because style, you know, has become blurred and boundaries, and it's become very diversified but also very inclusive. Musicological analysis and the models to sort of understand music are being employed by composers to kind of, you know, contextualize what they're doing. And so you end up with a lot of composers who are engaging in musicology and publishing as musicology, and their little, you know, critical commentary is actually kind of like musicological text and analysis of their own work. So, yes.
Thanks. I can see so many parallels with the kind of work that's going on in field work in ethnomusicology, being the practitioner, researcher, actually being within a community making music, and that is the subject of your research. So I wonder how much, and of course, Tom, you talked quite a lot about ethnography and auto-ethnography, which also has lots of parallels. So I wonder how this idea of practice as research in performance, composition, and other areas like that, perhaps music education, music and health, might draw from or learn from, or how they can inform each other, practices in ethnomusicology. So maybe there are people here.
Just kind of responding to that, I was thinking what was very interesting in ethnomusicology, you tend to have this certain kind of insecurity almost, that you need to kind of justify your practice because you tend to be going into a genre that is not your own. So there's always the kind of the shadow of appropriation that can very easily kind of overhang what you're doing. You need to say, look, that's not what I'm doing. Which I think, I mean, sort of listening to both of you, you're clearly kind of in the thing that you're researching. And so that is an issue that doesn't arise, which, well, maybe it does, but it didn't seem like it did. I found that quite interesting to see that was one issue that didn't need to get grappled with. But then instead, I mean, I think it's the whole kind of insider-outsider question, that if you're an insider, there's certain things like that you need to distance yourself again from where you're already inside, rather than being on the outside and trying to go in but not go too far. I wonder whether that was something that you had to think about at all, or how that worked for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a big problem that I face in presenting my own work within a research community, because there's always a danger of being accused of being, you know, essentially just kind of researching yourself. So you can say that, you know, you thought anything about this, and you know, how can you prove that, you know, how can you prove that, or how can you argue against that? I mean, I think keeping really good documentation is one way around that. So that's the kind of sort of an ethnographic tool. So I mean, I do a lot of writing in journals and a lot of audio recording these days as well. Now the technology is so good, you can literally be working on a project and you can pick up your phone. Say if you have a moment of something, a problem has been solved in some way, You can record that moment, and you can look back on that, and that is to a certain extent evidence, I think, that you can, if you're trying to interpret what you've done within other theoretical paradigms or whatever, and looking back on work over a period of years, I think you can use that as a kind of evidence for making a point, and a larger point that might connect several different events of that nature together.
Warwick.
Yeah. Thanks for that. RMA counsellors are deeply conscious, and probably BFE committee members as well, that 40% of the submissions for the last REF were non-text. In other words, they were practiced as research. And we're looking for advice, basically, is what, if anything, we should be doing about this as we think our publications policy. BFE has a journal, RMA has more than one journal and other publications, and they are all, of course, pretty much, at least seem to be concerned with so-called musicology, ethnomusicology. I think we would dearly love to find some kind of route where we can actually associate with the outputs, which just such an important aspect of British music research now. Advice, please.
Well, maybe I can, if you don't mind me jumping in, there are two existing models, both from theatre, which are not necessarily perfect, but they are perhaps a starting point. One was a journal which was called, I think it was called something like Connections or Interventions, something like that, by led by Yvonne Bonifant at Winchester, which sought to bring together the different types of documentation that practitioners might have. So it was clear that obviously some of these outputs are ephemeral, and you're not publishing the output, but you are publishing documentation of that output to at least share that beyond its initial audience. The second example is from a big theatre journal, and I can't remember the title of the journal, but Dr Rachel Hahn, who's also from Surrey, is leading a section which is sort of like a review section, but more about trying to tease out the research questions of performance that have happened. So what they want to do, and what they're proposing to do at the moment, is to publish a kind of abstract, some sort of photographic documentation, and the peer reviews of that practice.
Yeah,
So I think that's very nice, because first of all it encourages the peer reviewers to do a good job, and secondly it gives you an example of how does the community receive this practice, so it kind of has some sort of tools for decoding it as well. So those are two really interesting options at the moment. I think the issues around copyright and disseminating things which are not text are considerable, and I know of many so far unsuccessful enterprises that have come up against exactly that, and issues to do with data storage, file formats, etc. So it isn't an easy question, but
I just wanted to jump in. My university is part of this brand new research network called 21st Century Music Practices Research Network, and we've got the next study day at Kingston at Visconti Studio. But one of our aims is to address this issue is just set up a peer review college that's inclusive, that includes different types of music making, not just traditional academy style music making, but 21st century music practices, and just as a way that we can legitimize music practices as research, at least occurring in England. Just start local, London and the South East for now, but we hope to in the next couple of years have established this peer review college, which will really help, I think, hopefully get some outputs that are quote unquote published, or what have you. So that's one of the aims that we recognise it's a really big issue, particularly a lot of us who are working in universities who are under pressure to submit to REF, and sometimes we don't, and sometimes we'll just go, oh, I did this journal article, or my opera over here, I'm not going to submit, because people don't know how to handle it. So.
I think also Tom's point about the websites, we are in the 21st century now, and although print journals are still valuable, they aren't the only method of disseminating knowledge. Yeah. And if you're familiar with the research catalogue, which is run at the Orpheus Institute in Ghent, there is there are two strands to that. There is the journal, so the Journal of Artistic Research, which draws from the research catalogue, and then there's also the possibility for, if you're a researcher, you can go to the research catalogue and you can upload your work, and you upload it in the form of designing a web page. So you can put as many images there as possible, you can embed audio, you can put text, and you can move it all around so it interacts with each other and it doesn't have to be linear. It's actually incredibly difficult to work it, but if you can work it, you can possibly produce something that might represent your work quite well compared with perhaps a very linear text-based article. So, so those things are kind of coming.
And podcasts.
Yeah, there's on one of my slides. There's if you look at the Christopher Williams, isn't it? Sorry. Yeah. If you look at his website, there should be a link to. There's another guy that he referenced in an email to me, and I did put on the bottom of my slide. I can send it to you if you want it. Who was one of the sort of initiated one of the first theses as website things, and that has a kind of really intricate kind of map at the start, which where you like kind of mind map, where all of the areas of the thesis are kind of visually related, and you can hover your mouse over it'll bits of expand and all sorts of stuff. But this research project that I don't want to say too much about, that I'm trying to get off the ground, we were having a discussion and thinking, well, we'll do a conference, we'll do an editor collection, and a piece of practice, and I looked at it and thought, oh come on, this is what everyone's going to be proposing. I mean, they're never going, we need to be much more creative about, if a composer is working as part of the group, we need to be much more creative about what our outputs might be, and what format they might be. And it doesn't all have to be around the written word all the time. There's nothing wrong with that, but that can combine, with other kind of modes of presenting knowledge and research.
Maybe this is a good point, because I know that we're going to run out of time very soon. Maybe just to invite you to briefly show some of the stuff about your network, which might also help to answer this question.
Yeah, okay.
Whilst Tom is setting up his computer, I just also want to come back to Vanessa's point and your point, because I think that the idea about, different disciplines do practice and have practice is absolutely correct. And at the moment, at this university at least, we're in a situation where practice research PhDs are only validated within the creative arts. So people who have the potential to do practice are not able to do it at the moment. And with our director of the graduate school, I've had very interesting conversations about how, for example, education, the EdD, could be assessed through practice, but isn't at the moment, and he's very interested in that question. So I think these debates about knowledge, what does it mean, where is it, how do we express it, are very important, not just for creative arts, but also for other disciplines who might want to look at those arguments and see how they might apply to them as well. So,
yeah, okay. So there you are. I promised you some pictures. So the research network is called Music Composition as Interdisciplinary Practice, MCIP. We're building our website at the moment because we've actually done all the kind of events now, but we've got various documentation to put together on that. But we've got a Facebook page, which things that we've done, and I'm also very happy to send you my proposal that I wrote for the HRC and all that kind of thing if you want to see that. There's a cup of coffee. This is our festival, so it was about the coffee break. So basically this is what we did. We did 3 events. So this is a research network grant from the AHRC. They only give you 30 grand, so it's not like a massive 6-figure one, but it's very good if you want to kind of bring some people together, look at a question and so on. So we did 3 very different events. I think this is one, well I know because I looked at the peer reviews of the application, this is one reason it succeeded in getting funded. They weren't all the same kind of thing. So we had an invited seminar at Oxford Brookes, which was a typical sort of thing, but it had some practitioner workshops as part of it. Then we had a fairly traditional symposium at York, and then we had this festival very recently in December, and at that festival we premiered these 4 projects that we commissioned with some of the money that we got. And the idea about that is that the artists who we commissioned, and we had put out a call for projects via Sound of Music, the artists who we commissioned had to document their stuff really carefully. Because what the way I kind of sold it, as it were, as the HRC, is that the outcome of the network would be the website, which would have that documentation of the artists making these pieces on it. So it would become a resource for creativity researchers who wanted to investigate how interdisciplinary creativity happens. And I think what they liked about it was, again, talking about different ways of doing things. Each of these events in the network was very different.
And there was practice as part of it. None of the practice was my own though. So there wasn't any whiff of me trying to basically get a commission to do, you know, an opera or whatever, which I'm sure you could posit. I mean, we have to, from what we've been talking about, it has to be possible for you to posit that as a research inquiry. But as you said, Leah, that you know, you need to present that in certain ways, and I think the kind of a question at the end of it has to be there somehow. But that's not what I did. The research questions, my basic point was that there are all these centres, Sarah and M, which a lot of you will know, Huddersfield and so on, Goldsmiths, that are doing lots of interdisciplinary work. There are not many that are actually looking at interdisciplinarity itself. And what we wanted to do through Commission Goes Project is to make work, but also have it carefully documented so that it will be there, as I said, for people to sort of see. The main difficulty, have I got the research questions somewhere? This was the hardest thing. It was just to get these, you know, they're really simple. Kinds of interdisciplinarity, related to what I talked about in my other talk. How do you facilitate it? And this last one is addressed by the documentation. But that was the thing that took the time. And those of you that are doing PhDs at the moment, or have recently completed them, will know that getting the research question right, worded in the right way, is probably the hardest bit of it, in some ways. And it's really important to allowing that at some point, not necessarily at the start, as you said. I mean, I'm glad you said that you didn't have your research questions down at the beginning, they emerged. I think that's fine, particularly with artistic work. But at some point, they need to be there, and the things can kind of fall into place behind them, and particularly when you're writing a bid, obviously it's very important. And the other thing I would say, I'm not sure I've got much more that's useful, I won't go into that too much, but when I was writing the application, if you look at the AHRC documentation, they give you a long list of things that they want to see, and essentially I simply followed that, and every paragraph began with, you know, whatever little bit they wanted. You don't get a lot of room for your case for support. You get 4 sides, I think, for a research network grant, 7 for a bigger grant. So again, it was making it scan really well. I mean, I think some of you will know this, having probably got PhD studentships and so on, but it's being able to kind of boil down quite, you know, complex subjects with all that kind of complexity and different points of view that academic work entails into something that is very simple and digestible. And that's what research councils really seem to go for. They like it when it's put in language that is not oversimplified, but is kind of direct and as jargon-free as possible. So those are some sort of very quick tips as to how I managed to get funded for it. But I think the main thing was, I think what relates to what we've been talking about, is that the way that what we actually produced was rather different to what other research networks have done, the kind of way that the kind of events they've put on. So I made them all quite different. I mean, one of the reviews basically said that, you know, this seems to be a kind of slightly different approach to a research network. This is a good thing. But yeah, practice was very much at the heart of it. And in fact, on the website, I will always put up some of the articles that were delivered, papers that were given at York. There was some really good practice research stuff done as part of that, by choreographers, some theatre makers as well, all sorts of things. So there's certainly some good resources that I'll start to disseminate at some point, and come and find your way to the website and share them. So I hope that was of some use. Yeah. Sorry for a rather whistle-stop tour. Again, I'm happy to send people the proposal, because it's all done now. So you know, I got the money. So you know, if you want to see, I don't know, making it simple, I think, and distinctive in some way with how you do it.
That's brilliant, thank you very much, Tom.
Okay.
So I just want to make 2 announcements before we thank our speakers again. Well, the first is I have on a slide 2 web addresses. I'm not going to bother to change the computer over, but basically the Centre for Practice-Led Research here, I can give you the addresses. On our website and on our blog, you can see loads of examples of practice research projects and documentation. We've also got a YouTube channel that has all of the talks from every conference we've hosted and lots of performance lectures, so that's an example of how to disseminate research in a different way, and interviews with researchers. So if you're looking for case studies and examples of how people have done things, we have loads, including 3 brilliant talks from Dr Rachel Hahn, Professor Erin Erickson, and Professor Mark Whitty from last summer, all of which really address what are practice methodologies, where is the research, how do you express it, which I personally found extremely useful. So if you want to know how to find those, I will tell you. The second thing is that there is a concert starting in here at 1 o'clock of the Cantor Ensemble. That is part of my colleague Chris Price's research. Part of the work that he is doing is to reconstruct and re-perform the work of the Canterbury Catch Club, but that also includes 2 world premieres by a member of the ensemble who's written a catch and a glee, and I'm told that both eating and quaffing are allowed and even welcome during that concert, so please come. But please join me thanking Leah and Tom.